This is Continuum Drag, a podcast where we watch sci-fi, fantasy, and everything in between. This week, Alien Nation, episodes 1 and 2.
I tell you, George, I'm getting old, and I'm feeling it. Next month, 37, a whammo! You look pretty good. How old are you?
About 70.
Right.
In your solar years, I'm 70.
Get out of here.
That's quite true, Matthew. Our systems are very different. In your years, our median life expectancy is about 140.
Welcome to Continuum Drag, the podcast lying about its age. I'm Luke, here with my co-host Jordan. What's real, Jordan?
Okay, there was a line I actually really liked in one of these two episodes, and it was one person said, "I've been around the world, but not off the planet." Remember that? That gave me a good little chuckle. I thought it was pretty good.
Well, we're joined by a returning guest this week. Jane, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, guys. I'm so excited to be back. It's been a while.
When were you here last? I was trying to remember what you were watching.
And I should remember too, because you ask me this every time I'm on. What was the last thing that I was on for? And I can never remember.
I always think it's Langoliers, but I don't think
it
is.
Was it Langoliers?
No, because we did the Langoliers, and we did, I think, probably Kolchak, maybe?
Kolchak.
Which was fun. I enjoyed doing Kolchak a lot.
How great would this show be if it was Alien and Kolchak? That was the detective team.
Those who teamed up together?
Yeah.
His brain would be blown because he would have already found the alien.
Yeah,
and then
that's
what
true.
would the show be? That's it.
Get no work done. All right, Jane. Well, what's your history with Alien Nation? Is this a show you used to watch?
I never watched it. I was totally aware of it as a young person and fan of science fiction in the 90s. But I think for me, it wasn't cool enough because there were no spaceships. Like, it wasn't in space. It was just like regular aliens living in his town. I never watched it, but it was very much on my radar. And I remember there was a period later in the 90s, like after the show had completed, where I used to watch a lot of these like best sci-fi like compendium shows. I don't know if you guys remember this, but there used to be, I feel like there were a lot of them, but maybe there were only a couple, where they would be like the best sci-fi in television history, and it was like a 2-episode special where it was kind of like a countdown, and they would show clips from all of these different shows, like all the way back to like the Twilight Zone and Star Trek and all these things. And so that's actually how I learned about a lot of science fiction that I had maybe missed or that was slightly before my time. And Alien Nation was always featured in these shows. And it was also always featured if you bought like a magazine that said like the top 50 sci-fi shows of all time. Alien Nation was always in it. So I was totally aware of its existence, but I had literally never seen like a frame of the show until I watched it for this.
Well, that surprises me because at some point I saw your Plex media server and it seemed to be Alien Nation all over it.
Yeah, we have Alien Nation on Plex, and I don't know why. And I couldn't remember. I said to Steve, I'm like, why do we have Alien Nation? And he couldn't remember. So I think we must have downloaded it at some point in the past thinking that we might watch it, but I had not seen any of it. So yeah, it was great. It was interesting to watch it now. I sort of had an idea in my head of what it was, and it wasn't quite that.
Well, that's a great way to get us into it. Before we get started, though, I did a little background digging on the creation of Alien Nation just to situate us as we go into it. And of course, I'm sure you might know this, Jane, but it's based on the feature film Alien Nation that was written by, I'm going to try to pronounce his name, Rockne S. O'Bannon. Jordan, that's a Continuum Drag All-Star. Do you know why?
No. What did he do?
Is he Dan O'Bannon's brother?
That's a very good question. What I know him best as, and what Jordan knows him best as, is the creator of SeaQuest.
Oh. You know what? That's pretty good. He got 2 shows on there. Good for him.
But he wasn't the showrunner of this show.
Well, that's just it. He did not make the TV show. He wrote the feature. The TV show was developed for TV by a gentleman named Kenneth Johnson.
I'm sure he walked around set though, like the first day, and it was like, yeah, everything looks good. Anyways, like, you know.
Well, Kenneth Johnson was pretty big wheel at the old cheese factory because he had previously created or developed the Bionic Woman, the Incredible Hulk, and V, among others.
Wow, that's also
V.
a pretty good pedigree.
Yeah. So they brought in a pretty big gun to turn this into a show. I'd read on Wikipedia, I was sort of looking through, and I guess he'd been on an interview show or a podcast sometime in the 2000s, and he sort of talked about making the show because he'd been approached by the network to turn the film into kind of a science fiction Lethal Weapon.
Okay, I can kind of see snippets of that in what we watched.
But he didn't like the idea. He watched the movie, didn't particularly care for it, and there's the only thing he liked about the movie is there's a quick scene in the movie where you see the detective George, the alien, leaving his house and like saying goodbye to his wife and kids as he leaves, and he was just like, yeah, that's what I want to see. I want to see that guy's home life. So he sort of repitched it as a social commentary sci-fi drama, and he was sort of like, it's going to kind of be in the vein of In the Heat of the Night or something like that.
See, I wouldn't. It would have taken me a long time to get to In the Heat of the Night if I was describing what the show's like.
Well, I wonder if he's referring to the TV show In the Heat of the Night as opposed to the movie.
Oh yeah, with Carol O'Connor. That's right.
I wonder. I haven't seen it. I know of it, but I wonder if maybe that's more of a procedural cop show than the movie was.
Yeah, fair.
But that's sort of just a little bit of the background on it. It was kind of interesting to see both the man who created Sequest sort of involved in this, and then like I don't know. We haven't watched a lot of the other guys' shows. Like we haven't seen V. I never really watched Incredible Hulk or Bionic Woman, but like I know of them. I know he did a lot of big work. So
Yeah, he seems, I mean, this show, just from the first 2 episodes, this is like the safest show that I've ever seen, I think. Like, it sounds like, and like this guy, the showrunner was probably an extremely safe choice for the network too, because of his previous experience. And it's a very kind of softball thing. And so that's maybe the direction that they wanted to go with this.
I guess Jane missed all the slurs from last episode.
Well, you know what though? I think that's actually a great way to describe this show. And these 2 episodes, they have, not that it was like very edgy or hard from the pilot, the TV movie, but they've definitely shaved off some of those edges a little bit. I felt on these 2 episodes. I felt right off the bat watching this next episode. I was like, oh, okay, they've simplified an already a show that it didn't have the deftest touch to begin with.
Yeah, I guess we'll talk about it as we get into it. But Jane, we'll point these out as we go through. But I definitely did find a bunch of these subplots in a very heavily subplot-laden TV movie to pilot for this. They're really wrapping them up as fast as they can.
Yeah. No, I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say on this, because I didn't see the pilot TV movie either, so I had to figure out what had happened. But there were some flashbacks, so I think it's pretty clear.
Yeah, it's like you were flipping through the channels back in 1990 and you're like, hey, let's watch Alien Nation. I'm not too cool for this.
That's right.
Well, here's the IMDb summary for episode 1, Fountain of Youth. Sykes' issues with aging are intensifying when he learns the newcomer lifespan is almost twice that of humans. The death of a police officer during surgery raises questions about the hospital.
Accurate.
I'll say something right off the bat, and that's, Jane, hopefully you'll appreciate this. There's something about this episode that reminded me, I always go back to a specific episode of The X-Files where, and look, I love The X-Files, but there was one episode I remember being a kid being like, I don't know about that. And it's the episode where, I can't remember what the villain is or the person in the thing, but I think it's the episode where you find out there's someone who's controlling fire, and Mulder he's like, just so you know, I'm afraid of fire. And I'm like, and I was like, I remember being a kid and whatever I was, 9 or 10 at the time. And I was like, wait a minute. Mulder has never mentioned this in like 60 episodes. He's never mentioned that he's scared of fire, but it's convenient that he has to overcome it right now. And I know it's only this, like, essentially the first episode of this, but when Matt, what's his name? Matt Sykes is just like, hey, by the way, I've got a problem with aging. I was like, do you? Do you have a problem with aging? Are you just mentioning that now?
I thought the same thing. I'm like, this is the first or second episode of, like, the first regular episode of this show. We're just meeting this guy. We're not even halfway through the first season, and already we're supposed to feel for him and his age, like it doesn't make any, like it's a bad idea. Like they should have, this is an episode that's like at least maybe end of the first season, beginning of the second season, where you've gotten to know him, you have a sense of who he is, and then he's starting to feel like he's slowing down, or he's starting to feel like he looks old, because I'm just like, I have no point of reference. Like, we just met you and now you're complaining about being old, and you don't really look old. You seem fine. So
No, he's a babe, and I love his. By the way, I love his fashion. I don't know if it's in this episode, but he looks like a cool 15-year-old now in 2024. Like when he was wearing like those mom jeans with like the black and white striped sleeveless shirt and a fedora. I was like, well, that's a look, my friend.
that's in the next episode, and I very specifically wrote down that he was wearing that, because I was like, he is so mad that he's wearing a fedora and a striped tank top.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. Except, okay, so in this episode, he's way more racist than in the next episode too. Like, I feel like they were trying to figure him out a little bit and try to decide how, how difficult of a character he was going to be. But I guess he was extremely racist, maybe in the TV pilot. Not sure.
Yeah, pretty racist. That holds true to the pilot.
Right.
I don't know. I, for one, felt pretty seen. I'm feeling pretty old these days. And when he was pulling his groin, I'm like, oh, I feel you, Sykes. I feel you. My eyes are going too. But at any rate, the cold open of this episode is on George and a newcomer beat cop who are very. It just starts off right in a shootout. There's a perp. He's got a shotgun. The beat cop shoves George out of the way, takes some buckshot to the arm, bleeds what I guess is the alien blood that it looks like Pepto-Bismol, right? Like it just looks like Pepto-Bismol.
Yeah,
You know what
it looks like
exactly. I know what you're gonna say, Jane.
Yeah?
Are you gonna say the Star Trek blood from Star Trek 6?
yes, exactly. The
Yeah.
Klingon blood from Star Trek 6. That's the same
Oh,
stuff.
I like that. By the way, I said the Star Trek blood. Yes, the Klingon blood from Star Trek 6. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's George kills the perp. It's a real slow motion shootout from TV in the 80s. And then he's taken to a dedicated newcomer hospital that only treats newcomers there. And they discover it was started by Sykes' old high school friend, Dr. Trenner, who they have a quick meet and greet where they remember their time in high school together, and they both sounded like absolute monsters.
Yeah, they just sounded like they had just been absolutely terrible people.
As soon as he showed up, I was like, I guess he's the bad guy.
Yeah, that's a problem actually with this episode. I felt much more than the next episode. Is just, everything was so obvious what was happening. There was no mystery whatsoever, and it was so clear just from the get-go. I mean, I didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but I was like, you're 20 steps ahead of the characters on the show, and you're like, what is the point of this?
I think you're right. I think that's one of the problems of this, specifically this episode, is that, and it might just be a modern eye watching an older show, but they telegraph stuff right off the bat. Like, this guy might as well have like a monocle and like an evil mustache that he's twirling when he shows up. You're like, well, he's the bad guy. How long is it going to take for them to realize? And you're like, everything. You're just like, the hospital looks sketchy. Everything looks just like something's off. And I don't know if that's how they intended it, or if it was just like, maybe at the time that was fine if the audience kind of was going to get what they were expecting. But it seemed a little bit disappointing.
Yeah. And it was very clear pretty early on as well. Like, they made choices to show us what was happening as well. When the patient, whatever the guy's name was, Henry, I think was his name, the cop that got shot, the newcomer cop that got shot, when he starts to, we're kind of following him and we see what's happening to him. And then it's supposed to be a mystery what happened to him. And it's like, sorry, guys. It's not how you write a mystery. But can we back up for a second and just have a conversation about the opening title sequence of this show?
Oh,
Or
absolutely.
because I'm not sure, was there an opening title sequence in the TV movie? Like, have you talked about this already, or is this new for episode 2?
This is basically in the TV movie. I think they might have added a couple new clips to it, but it's essentially in the TV movie.
Okay, so there's a clip at the start that kind of gives you like a summary of what happened, like that the aliens landed 5 years ago and they used to be slaves and now they're integrated into our society. And then there's what should be like if you didn't have your sound on, you would think it was a very upbeat sitcom, sort of family drama style opening with like clips of the characters and like their names underneath, and they're like smiling or like doing a thing. but there's very dark, disturbing music underneath it. And it goes on for like an entire minute. And it's so strange. Do you guys not find it strange?
Well, it has that. It almost is like the opening to like Family Matters. But you're right. It has this like ominous music. But the part I really like about it is it starts with, you know, you're right. Like, it's like, look at this seedy undertone of Los Angeles. Then it's like, also there's an alien family, and then for no reason, while it's doing the clips, the music cuts down, and you have George and Matt in the car, and Matt yells and hits the top of the car. He's like, ah! And then it stops, and then goes to a shot of George being like, ain't he a stinker? Anyways, alienation. You're like, what is this?
Yeah, it's I felt like the opening title sequence was a microcosm for some of the issues that this show was facing tone wise. It didn't seem to really know what it was doing, and yeah, and it was very strange. It was very weirdly dark. I almost felt like I was watching like a YouTube parody of something. And then I thought, well, maybe they just did this for episode 2, and by episode 3, they'll have sorted this out. Nope, just the same opening. So yeah, very strange, very off-putting.
I think it's what they want.
I guess it's what they want. I just baffles me as to why they want it. Like, why? If you want the opening to be like dark and weird, then make it dark and weird. But probably someone at the network was like, oh no, we just need to have the cast and have it be like a normal drama, family drama opening. It's the music that really threw me off. This sort of dark chanting, which I guess is supposed to be, I'm assuming it's supposed to be like the newcomers' language. Like it's them singing.
Yeah, exactly.
Something. But yeah, super weird.
You're not wrong. We definitely noticed it in the pilot as well, that it's both a cop show, but it also is like borderline a family sitcom. Like it kind of swings between those two things. I mean, yeah, your mileage will definitely vary based on how you feel about going between those two extremes.
Yeah.
As you kind of mentioned, you know, the theme of this episode is like aging and like the thoughts around humans have around getting older, that kind of stuff. But so before we get into the plot, I just thought we'd maybe quickly go through the very, very minor B plot that George's wife Susan has in the episode, because it goes by so fast. It maybe has 4 scenes total. Like it's not a very complicated one. But essentially, Susan, who in the pilot was going to USC, has apparently graduated between the pilot and now. And she's applying to work at a bunch of ad agencies. And she's not having any luck because she goes in and they're just like, we're looking for that edgy, hip feeling of the youth. And you're I think she's 68 years old in alien age, which is the equivalent of 38 years old, I think, in human age. So either way, she's too old for these jobs.
It's the worst plot line. I thought her last episode, like in the pilot, her plot is that like they've moved into the new neighborhood and like the neighbors aren't as nice as she'd like. And I was like, that's some gripping stuff. And then this one, she's trying to get it. She's trying to get a job. It's just it's that funny thing where you have a bunch of characters, but like they want to have these subplots, but they clearly don't know really what to do with her yet, because what they're interested in is this mystery of what's happening in the hospital, which is not that interesting. And then so they're like, well, we need something for her to do. I guess she can go get a job.
Yeah, but I mean, it was connected thematically to the theme of the episode because of dealing with her age and stuff. But it was so clunky. Like, she literally shows up at the job interview, and the first question the interviewer asks is, how old are you? And then she says how old she is, and then she is immediately discriminated against based on her age. And the interviewer is like, sorry, this job isn't for you. And it's like, I know it's the 90s, but I still think that wasn't allowed. Like, I don't think you can do that. Just like ask someone how old they are and then tell them immediately that because of their answer, they should no longer continue the interview.
Please leave.
Yeah, I mean, basically that's what happened. And then in the end, she just decides that the best thing to do is lie about her age. So she lies about her age and they're like, you're hired. And she gets a job.
Well, what I liked is, you know, they reveal this thing, that the idea that the aliens live longer than humans. So, you know, all the people like George is 70 years old. Like all these people are older than you expect. And then you can tell they're like, but we have to explain the children. So there's like lines in this episode where they're explaining, it's like, you see, our children, they age the normal human rate until 20 years old, and then they start slowing down. I'm just like, perfect, thank you. We're all going to have questions about that. Way to explain that.
Yeah, just in case your young actors seem to be aging too quickly. It's like, no, don't worry, they're normal. Yeah.
You know what, though? Sure, like to your point, is it clunky? Absolutely, but I'd rather them just throw that line of dialogue, and I'm like, all right, that tightens it up for me. Seems fine.
Yeah.
It's great. I could just see the writers' room being like, "Hey, we gotta solve this right now. Nip this in the bud. Let's go."
Yeah.
But a new character is also moving into the Francisco household in Susan's storyline. It's the wacky, new agey Uncle Moodri, and he's brought his pet goat.
The wacky uncle is such a. I just didn't know what to do with him. Like in this episode, it was like, okay, fine, he's a bit of a sideshow, but he takes like a much larger role in the next episode, and I started to become concerned about him at that point, but which we'll get to. I'm sure we get to the. Next
I like
episode.
how the odd serialization of the show where they bring Uncle Moodri in this episode, and he's like, "Hey, I'm Uncle Moodri. Stay tuned." And then he like walks off the set. You're like, what's he doing? You're like, don't worry, next episode. I know we're teasing it. I know you guys want more Uncle Moodri. Don't worry, next episode he'll actually do something. But I was like, why didn't he just show up in the next episode? It was so bizarre. He like had one scene where he's like, hey, I don't like where your couch is. Anyways.
Well, he's there to dole out some wisdom to the family because they need some good old-fashioned newcomer wisdom. Like when Susan's complaining about not being able to job, he's the one who says, why don't you just lie about your age? She's like, oh.
Yes, he sort of is this character that they brought in to kind of have a cosmic viewpoint, because his background is, because he's older, he's like lived on their like home planet, and he's been to a lot of different places in the universe. So he has like a more holistic view of how everything fits together and how everything is relative. And his argument to Susan is like, well, if you're on Earth, you're 68, but if you're on some other planet, then you would be this age, and if you're on a different planet, then you'd be this age. So it's all relative and none of it matters, so just lie and say whatever you want. And that's just kind of his vibe.
From a purely canon perspective, the newcomers are supposed to be genetically engineered slaves that were built to work. I don't understand how they have a home planet and how Moodri was from there, but I guess they're slowly shifting the canon of the show.
Yeah, I have some questions too, which I'll bring up in the next episode about how that all kind of works.
Anyway, that's sort of Susan's storyline. As you said, Jane, she gets the job at the end when she lies about her age. Though you didn't mention that she gets the job at the end and it freeze frames, and that's the last shot before the credits roll. It's like they really like went out on that button. I was like, oh, wow, this is the end of the episode, huh?
I mean, I was worried. She was never going to get a job.
I can't wait to see how advertising worker plays into future episodes.
I bet you it doesn't.
Hey, I got a weird point. Do you think that, because they're all wearing like these sort of like bald cap prosthetic head things, I find it very difficult to actually tell everyone's age when they have them on. And this is more of a thing in the next episode where there's like a young girl is kind of the plot. But like, I swear I can't tell the difference between someone who's like 20 and someone who's 40. Do you think it's just the bald caps that are doing that? Do you think our hair is really distinguishing how old we are?
I think that might be a you problem.
That's a me problem?
No, I don't think it's a you problem. I get what you're saying. It's in the next episode, there is a person who's supposed to be younger, and she doesn't seem that young. It could just be like a TV problem where they like hire actors that are too old to play the young.
Well, we'll get into the next episode when we get there, but I do believe the problem there is that it's a 25-year-old woman playing 16.
Because I was watching, I'm like, maybe this like bald cap thing is just smoothing everyone out.
They do, I think. Well, it does a little bit because they're smoothing out people's foreheads and stuff with the like to incorporate the bald cap. It is. I think you're right, Jordan. I think it is a little bit harder to peg their age.
Yeah. So my point is, old Susan or whatever, she didn't need to worry about it too much.
Well, it is funny. They definitely don't know until she tells them. Like, how they can't tell an alien's age by looking at them.
Yeah. Like those spots look older to me.
Well, that's why Uncle Moodri came along. We needed him. We needed him to explain that.
Also, one last thing. I like that they keep mentioning these goats and we hear them, but we never actually see the goats. You're like, a bell dingles in the background. They're like, hey, there's a goat over there. Don't worry. Don't look over there, though.
We don't got a budget for goats.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, let's get back to the main plot of this. As we've mentioned, Sykes is getting old. He says he's about to turn 37. He's pulling his groin playing basketball. His hair is thinning. His eyes are getting worse. And George just to rub it in, he's like, hey, I noticed your old high school friend, Dr. Trenner, sure looks a lot younger than you. And Sykes is like, I can't believe it. I can't believe it.
Did you think he looked that much younger? Because I was like, did he? Did he look that much younger? They just look like two dudes from early 90s TV.
Yeah, it didn't work visually, but I got the point. Okay, he feels old, and let's just like take it and move on because clearly this is important.
Yeah.
And this fear of aging sets the stage for the death of that beat cop we saw at the beginning. He's at the hospital, he's walking around, as you said, Jane, and he like notices, hey, there's a human being treated in here. I was told distinctly no humans get treated at this hospital, and you're kind of left with this cliffhanger, like, what does that mean? And then the next thing you hear, he's died during surgery. George gets a call. He's like, oh, your buddy? He died.
Well, and the point is that he had a very minor, because he was shot in this altercation, and it was, I guess, as minor as a gunshot could be on his arm. And they were all like, he's fine. He just needs to have whatever it is, some sort of follow-up procedure. And then they find out he's died from that. So it was shocking that the injury wasn't life-threatening.
And we get to see a newcomer's funeral for the first time. A little treat to see what their funeral rites. And not pretty dull overall. Like, it's open casket just laying on a slab. Got some robes on. They're like, these symbolize the former freedom of our homeworld. And I'm just like, what? I still don't fully understand how this is working.
I like that you said the funeral is dull, as opposed to all those really awesome funerals where they're a real ball.
Yeah, man. Give me a Klingon funeral, man. That's a good funeral.
They did have a. Do you notice he had a double helix above his coffin for some reason?
I did notice that. I thought that was related to them being genetically engineered, but then they're just talking about their homeworld. I'm just like, I don't understand. Someone needs to explain this mythology to me soon.
Yeah, so I thought that they were an enslaved species based on all, because I hadn't seen the first episode. Based on everything that the people were talking about in this episode and the next episode, I thought that they were like people who had a home world, and then they had somebody came and enslaved them, and then they were traveling the galaxy as slaves for who knows how long. That's what I got, but clearly they're changing the canon a little bit. They're shifting it.
Yeah, things are shifting, so we'll find out, I'm sure, in future episodes. But so far, it's a little confusing. At any rate, at the funeral, the cop's widow demands George find out how he could possibly died. If I were George, I'd be like, this is not a cop job. He died in surgery. You got to talk to a doctor about this. But George is a good guy, so he's like, I'll look into it.
Also, there's probably a better venue to do that as opposed to right at the funeral, to lean backwards and be like, I demand justice. I'd be like, at least wait till you're back in the lobby with like a little triangle sandwich in your hand.
I don't know. She was distraught. I forgave her for that outburst. I thought, you know what? She's super upset. She's just lost her husband. She has like her 2 kids, or however many kids. There were some kids there. Everyone was looking. It was like, I was just actually shocked that they killed off this guy. And this might be one of the things that people like about this show, although I'm not sure, is that we actually got to know this character, this cop, Henry, a little bit. Like, he was in a few scenes. He was chatty, seemed like a nice guy. Everything was fine. Bam, dead. And now as a viewer, you're like, oh crap. And then you see his wife and his kids. Like, you're immediately actually kind of sucked into this like very sad situation. Whereas I think in some other procedural shows, they wouldn't have spent as much time with this guy who died. It would have been more just like, oh, he's a colleague, or there's a dead cop. Do you know what I mean? But I actually found the mother's like plea in the funeral like kind of sad.
Yeah, Jordan's always complaining about these newcomers, how emotional they are, how they need to keep it to themselves. He's always like, these sponge heads.
No, I would have said when the lady turned around, like, she's like, you got to do something. And I'd be like, how old are you? Are you old enough to be here?
At any rate, they utilize Sykes' doctor neighbor Kathy to come to the hospital and just check out the old report on the dead cop. And seems like it was an accident. He went into surgery. There was some problems with the anesthesia. They had to do a tracheotomy, and he died. It was apparently not an uncommon idea. But as they're looking at the report, George notices a nurse giving him the old side eye from across the room. So he goes over there, and the nurse kind of comes clean and says, yeah, we got a lot of anesthesia-based deaths recently around here. She's like, if you ask me, all these tracheotomies, they might mean something. They go see the coroner, and the coroner's like, he's missing a gland from his throat. And they're like, what's the gland do? And they're like, we don't know, but it could be anything.
The coroner's smoking while she's doing, I think it was a lady, the coroner is smoking while she's doing the autopsy. I'm like, this is amazing.
I have a couple problems with this evil doctor's plan. He's an evil doctor. I mean, we all know that from like scene 1. And this is the first thing. Let's say you're an evil doctor and you need to steal glands from an alien. I'm just give you some advice. Don't have them all die from the same thing. Vary it up a little bit. And then you can't have someone go, wait a minute. A, B, C, and D all died from the same thing. No, have one have like a gangrene foot, and someone else has tracheotomy, and then someone else had a splinter infection or something. I don't know, But like, don't do
Yeah.
the same thing.
Although I did sort of feel like it was a bit of a statement on like how little anyone was paying attention.
Oh,
Like,
maybe.
because they're newcomers and they have their own exclusive hospital and nobody's watching, and the doctor can just completely unilaterally get away with it, and no one has even bothered to look it up, look at it before, and he's so confident. So I felt like it was about systemic prejudice and discrimination in a way, because he was able to get away with doing literally the exact same thing and no one said a word, including the other people's families or whoever else died previously.
Well, Dr. Trenner even says, he's just like, hey, we're a research hospital. Anyone who comes here automatically agrees to let us do research on any of their organs should they die. And I was just like, it seems, if it's the only hospital you can go to as a newcomer, it seems a little unpleasant to be like, yeah, we can do whatever you want with your body.
And that's a point too that I think George brings up, is that like it's against at least one of their religions or their culture's beliefs to have parts of them removed before they after they die. So it's like a real like double insult sort of thing.
Yeah, and George, he's pretty unsatisfied with what's being told to him. So he corners that nurse outside at the old pig parts food cart where you get the best pig parts for your lunch hour.
I like that. It's funny.
And she's just like, hey, every time a newcomer dies at our hospital from a tracheotomy, a new human leaves with a cut in their side and a little bandage over it.
Yeah, like she's got it all figured out. Like she is completely noticed everything and all of the similarities of what's happening, and is just kind of like, I'm suspicious, but I don't know what to do. Which is, again, I also thought that was kind of interesting. I'm like, these people have no recourse. Like, they have no system of justice that is designed to help them. They have nowhere to report anything. They have nowhere, they come into this hospital and sign a waiver that is explicitly against their own religion, probably because they feel they have no choice. Like, I thought that was kind of interesting.
I don't disagree. There's a lot about hospitals in here that maybe could have used a little more of a nuanced touch, but like, it's definitely there. I think the idea is there.
Yes, and there's definitely a lot of stuff of like people looking at confidential patient records, and then they get caught looking at records and they're like, oops, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. I just put these back.
It was the 80s. You could do whatever you wanted. It's fine.
By the way, I love when people in TV and movies go to look through files, because I always think if I was doing it, and it's like, it's like a needle in a haystack, and they're like, I gotta find that file I'm looking for. I'd be like, I'll never find it. I don't know where to even just start. Like, I'm like, I don't know how they've organized their files. Is it alphabetical? Is it by disease or something? I'd be like, they're like, did you look at the files? I'm like, I've just started. I don't even know what I'm looking at yet.
Probably by date, I'd imagine.
See, maybe not though. You don't know.
I would think they would be alphabetical by patient name. That's what I would expect. And so then how would you find like all of the deaths? They're not searching it on a computer, right? It's not like nowadays on all of the cop shows where they're just like, put in the field of like type of death and try to find all the people that died the same way or died in the same date range. It's like they do not have that. It's files on a shelf in a room with little colored labels on the sides of them.
I would look under M for mysterious deaths, if that's how they've organized it.
I could do it, I think. Just put me in a room. We'll find out. At any rate, Sykes, he's not so concerned about all this. He's going to go to a party at his old doctor friend's house. The guy used to be a plastic surgeon, so he knows all the best people. He's got quite a beautiful home. And when he gets there, the party's in full swing. He hears a man telling a racist joke he told at the top of the episode, and the man's wearing a Keep America Pure button. And old Sykes is like, ooh, not a good look for me.
Yeah, I was like, oh man, like they are really like just diving head first into like full on racism. But I mean, like, accurate,
Oh, absolutely. And Dr. Tenner is so happy that Sykes is there. He's just like, hey, I brought this woman here to like hook up with you. I hope that's cool. And Sykes is like, yeah, sounds good to me. She's like, literally, she's not beating on the bush. She's just like, so do you have a gun I can hold? And he's just like, what?
Yeah, she's like grabbing him under the table and stuff.
And Someone slips Sykes a little Mickey into his drink. So midway through the party, he stands up and collapses in front of all of the guests.
Yeah, he's
I like-
very clearly roofied.
I like it that like he's either not a very good cop or we're just supposed to not pay attention to it. But I love that there's nothing else it could be. I like because the next scene he like wakes up and he's like, oh, that was something. I've woke up in these nice pajamas in this nice bed, and then the doctor comes in and is like, yeah, I guess you had a little too much to drink. I'm like, there's no way you would think that.
Well, he also wakes up, lifts his shirt. He has a bandage over the side of his body where they said the bandages went, and the doctor's just like, oh yeah, I just took care of a little something there for you. And he's just like, oh, okay, thanks. He's like, so thanks for doing that, I guess.
Okay, which brings me to my second point. So, of evil doctor's plan. Because it's so clear what has happened now. They're doing surgeries on aliens for the benefit of humans. That's what we know. We don't know exactly at this point what they're doing. You know, I think you can figure it out with the aging theme of the episode. But why does he do this to Matt? Like what is like he's already has doing tests that he's seemingly getting paid for. Well, I think he says he's getting rich doing it. So why do this to Matt? What is the benefit for him?
I thought the same thing. I'm like, presumably all of the other procedures are people who like humans who wanted this procedure, and they're paying large sums of money to do this secret illegal thing to this doctor. But now he's just doing surgery without permission on Matt Sykes. I think it's because he was kind of trying to bribe him into working for him. I think that was he was like trying to get him more, like ingratiate him a little bit more into stuff.
Have either of you had a friend before? They're just pals. You're just helping a pal out.
but that's funny. But it is that. But it's like to double it down. It's like also like it's not like they've been friends for consecutively this time. It's someone he hasn't seen in a long time. He doesn't know how he's changed his views, if they would even get along. He doesn't even know if he's a good cop. He's just like, eventually, it's going to be this like job offer and things, but it's like, but I don't understand why he picked him. It's not like we've seen anything specific in any of the scenes where he was like, oh, you know what? This is actually works out well. He'd fit exactly for this thing I need. It's just like, here's a guy who's like a cop who you don't know his loyalties, and I'm just gonna throw this Hail Mary that maybe this is gonna work out for me. I just thought it was like, this is clumsy.
No, Jordan. He misses going to the bathroom, tossing firecrackers in. They're gonna be doing that at a hospital every week. They're gonna have a great time.
It's also possible. Like I was also like, maybe he's just trying to get him on side because he knows that the cops are they are poking around, and so he wants to bring him in, offer him a job, get him on side, and then also kind of do this surgery. So now I guess he can sort of blackmail him and be like, well, now you're complicit because you have the surgery. I don't know.
I think if there was actually maybe a really dramatic age difference, like this was not an old classmate, but an old professor or teacher or something who they were close, and he knows that the guy's best years are behind him and he misses what he used to do, and this is an opportunity for him to relive past glories. You know, he's an old cop who's doesn't have a purpose in life anymore. He sits on his porch thinking about old cases, and he's like, hey, I just like knocked 10 years off you. Do you want 10 more? You could do this again. I'd be like, all right, you could convince someone that way. The problem, I think, being is that regardless of how old we are as a viewer, 37 is not old. And I just don't, like, I know they can be like, oh, he pulled his groin playing basketball, or he's like, I'm getting too old for this stuff. You can throw as many lines as you'd like in this, but he's just not old enough to justify it being a motivating factor. Even in episode 2.
Yeah.
Jordan, next time you wake up with a groin pull, just imagine someone offering you $130,000 a year and that groin pull going away. You tell me you don't come around.
But that's the thing. It's like everyone has aches and pains and stuff. I don't think there's enough. I don't think they've established enough for this to work. But maybe it's like to Jane's point. Maybe if this had happened later in the season and we had sort of established that maybe he's a step behind and he's starting to think about retirement or something like that. Maybe it would land a little bit better, but I just thought it was like, this is just not enough motivations for in this in-world for him to be able to make, for us to plausibly believe he's going to make a switch.
Yeah, it's a weak episode overall. Like the premise is like kind of weak, and like everyone's sort of reason for doing and saying all the things that they're doing and saying, like it's all just like very tenuous and highly convenient and doesn't actually make a lot of sense when you look at it top down.
Are you telling me in the next scene when George goes home and takes off his shirt in front of, or Sykes goes home, takes off his shirt in front of George, revealing the bandage on his side, letting George know that he has had the surgery is convenient?
They're always taking their clothes off in front of each other. They're very close partners.
Well, that's what happens. It kicks off the next stage of it where he sees the like surgery on the side of Sykes. And he's just like, oh my God, they put the newcomer gland in you. And Sykes is not nearly as disturbed by having like someone else's organ in him as he should be.
Yeah, like he's literally been taken into surgery without his permission and operated on without his permission. And he's like, eh.
But they're basically now able to suss out that whatever they've been doing is essentially reverse aging humans, and they're gonna go and like take care of it. They call up the judge and ask for a warrant so they can get the files from the Dr. Trenner's house. The judge says no, they have insufficient evidence. So they're like, well, fuck it, let's just break in illegally and take it. That shouldn't be a problem for the case later.
Was there a scene in the courtroom? Did I miss something?
No, there's a thing that this show has had, and I've noticed now a few episodes in, there seems to be a few scenes missing, and I think it's just they film things and then go, oh, that doesn't quite make sense. Just throw a line of dialogue in. They're like, the warrant didn't work. Anyway, but I felt the same thing. There should have been a scene there, but there's you have to get back to Susan in a job interview. There's not enough time.
They didn't need the scene. All they needed was him saying, they said insufficient evidence. Let's go break it.
Yeah.
So Sykes goes under the auspice of accepting the job offer. Since he is famously a noted racist, the doctor is not suspicious at all. And George goes up while they're talking into I guess his office, the doctor's office, and he starts digging through the files. He starts finding all the files on the surgeries, and he discovers a videotape of the surgery in which the beat cop died.
How convenient.
And as opposed to taking it and leaving and looking at the evidence, he just puts it in the closest VCR to watch. He's immediately caught. The doctor has a newcomer's kind of accomplice, and that guy walks up and jams a needle into him and sedates him.
Yeah, but he's like, then we've got like a full on Wolf of Wall Street Quaaludes type scene where he's lurching down the stairs and half falling over and still trying to speak and do stuff. It was awesome. I really loved that part. It
is great because down in the den, I guess, where Sykes and the doctor are talking about his job offer, the doctor gets a call from the accomplice being like, FYI, they're breaking into your office upstairs. He's like, got it. Can you? They're talking all in the alien language, so he can't know. And the accomplice comes down. He's just like, time for a booster shot of Alien Fountain of Youth. And they hear George calling upstairs, and he's like, oh, I've been caught. So a shootout breaks out,
yeah.
Everyone's just they shoot the accomplice, and he's injured, runs away, and then he turns around and shoots the doctor. There's just gunfire everywhere.
Yeah, it was super violent, and the doctor gets shot and killed, and the accomplice guy, they run him over with the car, and then it's over.
Yeah. They've stopped the bad guys, and as the police are arriving, Sykes and George have a debate about whether they should release the information that the newcomers have a gland that can help with human aging and human ailments. And George is just like, this guy was evil, but there might be someone who could put this research to good use and help both our societies. And Sykes is like, no, humans are evil. And he burns all the files. And I guess no one ever finds out.
I guess.
That was weird. I didn't understand his point. I didn't get what his goal was.
Okay, so I didn't understand at the time when I was watching it, but then afterwards I understood. Is basically because in the grand scheme of things, if these aliens have a gland that all you have to do is do a simple day surgery, remove the gland from the alien and put it in a human, and suddenly people are de-aging 50 years, like that lady that they show as the patient zero,
mm-hmm.
or the aliens are dead. They're dead. Like
Right,
nobody's
right.
gonna it's just gonna be a disaster for them. They're all gonna there's gonna be organ harvesting. People, even if they make a law, like people are gonna be illegally murdered. Like it's gonna be a slaughter. So I think that's why he burns the evidence, because they want to make it be like, oh, no one will ever know about this, which obviously is not accurate. Like some other doctor is probably going to figure it out at some point.
But isn't there a more interesting way of having that be maybe not the crux of the episode, but the moral dilemma of what is right, what we should do for the justice of these people is expose these horrible crimes happening, but by doing that, like you're saying, it will actually create a larger problem. And what is the correct moral thing to do? That might be an interesting idea for an episode. I don't know how you would intertwine it with this and how you do that in a nuanced way.
Yeah, I don't know how you do that in the last 10 minutes of an episode.
Well, that's what I mean. I don't think you can do it in the last 10 minutes of the episode. That's why it's, I think, maybe weird.
Yeah, well, it also brought in, like, I mean, it also reminded me of, like, it's like, oh, what do we do with, like, Nazi research, right? Like, Nazis, like, did all kinds of horrible experiments and tortured and killed people and discovered some stuff.
Yeah.
Should the scientific community use the things that they discovered or not? And that has been a moral dilemma for the last, like, 70 years or whatever, too. So it sort of had that vibe to me as well, where Sykes is kind of making a unilateral decision. He's like, I'm going to burn the Nazi evidence, basically. Burn the Nazi science.
There should have been a scene, though, when they find out the older woman who's had 12 treatments and is now made young, and that was the woman that was hitting on with Sykes. There should have been a scene where he was like, ew, you're old? They didn't have that in.
Because we know how he discriminates against people all the time.
Exactly. There you go.
We didn't have time, Jordan. We had to find out whether Susan got that job or not.
Yeah. But one small thing I love when they mention other planets. And Uncle Loomis, what's his name? Moodri. He says to her, he's like, it's like you're 28, like you would be on Tromus 4. And I was like, yes, nice. Let's hear more about Tromus 4.
Well, sounds like you want more Moodri, so let's get into the next episode.
Yeah.
Here is the IMDb summary for episode 2, Little Lost Lamb.
I never should have taken her in. I should have left her on the streets where she belonged.
Matt,
I'm gonna nail the son of a bitch who killed her. I'm gonna nail his ass.
I don't think we should take this investigation. You are emotionally involved. It makes for bad police work. I, too, am horrified by her death, but if taking Mary in was an error in judgment, let's not make another.
You didn't come home and find that girl lying dead on your floor. I'm on this case. You don't like it, put in for a new partner.
Sykes tries to help a 16-year-old newcomer prostitute. George deals with the intrusion of Uncle Moodri and his traditional Tank Denise values.
Did this episode not have the best opening of like, you guys want to see what this sexy, salacious show's about, don't you?
Yep, I loved it. It was very Devil Wears Prada. It's like a whole bunch of like shots of like women getting dressed, but you don't see their faces. So you've got like, a shot of somebody. Well, you see somebody putting on lipstick, you see somebody putting on like some shoes, zipping up a dress. So it's just like all these close-ups of like a torso and a leg and lips. And you're like, ooh, who are the sexy ladies? And then you find out that the sexy ladies are newcomers sexy ladies. And you're like, interesting.
Yeah.
And then later you find out they're 16 years old and being taken to a party at what? It's Jeffrey Epstein's house. What else you're going to do?
It is funny, that sort of thing, because it is that thing of like, isn't this kind of sexy? Don't you know what's happening? Like, oh yeah, by the way, they're 16. You're like, oh, I feel very weird now. Thank you for that.
I didn't realize that they were all 16. I thought I didn't know, I didn't understand that was the case. I thought it was, we'll get into it, but I thought that like, obviously one of the characters is young. One of the ones
I think some of them are. I think you're right. I don't think all of them are, because we find out one of them is like an actress and has like a career. But I think there's an implication quite a few of them are underage.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. That scene, is already kind of like on the, it's iffy watching people being dropped off, escorts being dropped to the party. Gets much more disturbing as the episode goes on.
Yeah.
At any rate, this is a prelude to the plot that the theme of this one is a reflection on how humans are obsessed with sex. They just love sex. That's all they can. They base themselves for it, and it's sort of gotten into with an explanation. There's a new film that's come out. It's called Alien Heart. It's a newcomer romance, and it's the first to kind of star like newcomers. So it's like a big deal in the newcomer community. It stars Eleanor Roosevelt. Everyone's very excited. She's going to win an Oscar one day, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the first time I realized that all of the aliens are named after, like, I guess they just name themselves after famous people. Was this something that was in the pilot?
Yeah, when they were taken out of quarantine, the quarantine officers named them as they left, and so many of them have joke names that the quarantine officers basically saddled them with.
Okay, so it wasn't even their own choices.
Yeah, yeah. It's like when you get off at Ellis Island, someone's like, "Well, this is too hard to say. You're Frank D'Angelo now."
Okay, I was sort of hoping that the aliens had chosen their own name. In my imaginary like way that this worked was their names were unpronounceable in English, and so they needed to choose, like, they wanted to choose English friendly names, and so they looked back into the history of, Western civilization and picked the names of people that they admired or that they thought were interesting, and they had chosen their own names. That's what I thought.
That's a very lovely, lovely, sweet way of looking at it, but it's like, nah, people are just mean.
There are a few alien names. We know Moodri. We know that the son, Buck, his real name is Phoenixa. We know a few of their names. Yeah. At any rate, Sykes and George just sort of discuss this plot of this movie, and it's like apparently a very beautiful, moving film about a couple of newcomers finding each other. And as they're talking about it, Sykes is trying to hide the fact that he couldn't get through. It was too boring for him. But they notice a newcomer pimp openly threatening one of the girls from the opening on the street with salt water. So they pull over and kind of chase the pimp off. And George is so upset. He's disgusted about how humans have like degraded newcomer women by like putting them out in the street like this. Like, this is not how they should be. This is not how they treat sex. And like this is humans' fault essentially that this is happening to his people. Mm-hmm.
So 2 questions. One, this saltwater thing was new. They hadn't mentioned it in the previous episode. Was it in the pilot?
It wasn't. This is the first I remember it. Luke, am I wrong? I think this was the first time it was mentioned.
It may briefly be mentioned in the pilot, I think very briefly. It's from the feature film. That's a big plot point of the feature film, is that if they go into salt water, they die. It kills them quite violently.
Okay, all right. Because, yeah, this was new, but clearly, like, she's terrified of a tiny little vial of salt water. Almost like it's acid.
They do a bad job of setting the stakes around that salt water.
Yeah, it wasn't clear to me if it was, until quite a bit later in the episode, if the saltwater fear was justified. Like, I wasn't actually sure if the saltwater was going to actually injure anybody, or if it was just sort of this preconception that they had that saltwater could damage them. But overall, the whole thing felt very much like Signs. It's like, how are you even on this planet if you can't handle saltwater? Like, like Earth is like 90% saltwater. What is happening?
There could have been a scene where it's like, you see someone have like, I don't know, this pimp or something being angry, and he throws salt water on someone, and you see it how horrible it is, and you'd be like, ooh, that's dangerous. I don't want anyone else to get that salt water. And then later when you see it, you're like, ooh, that's threatening. But to Luke's point, it wasn't. It didn't really have any weight to it. You're like, I'm gonna throw salt water in here. You're like, oh, I guess that's bad. I hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Anyway, what they find out about this girl, her name is Mary Shelley, and they quickly notice that, as George puts it, she has sort of some conditioning from being a slave that she hasn't been able to break. She's always looking for someone to tell her what to do. She's having trouble integrating. And so George basically asks Sykes, he's like, hey, can you take her home, clean her up, and get her on a bus back to her parents? I'd take her home, but I got too much Moodri at home. I can't deal with it right now. And you've got that teenage daughter, so you know how to deal with teenagers. And up to this point, I had forgotten he had a teenage daughter. I was like, oh, yeah, right. I forgot that about Sykes.
Yeah.
Have we met? We've not met his teenage daughter at all. We've just been
we've just seen a picture.
Okay.
Yeah. And so he like takes her home, borrows a dress from his neighbor, and then like sends her to the bus station, says, see you later. I've got to get to my partner George's barbecue. It's not going well. None of the other colleagues from work have shown up, and George has cooked the burgers for an hour on the barbecue, so they're no good.
A little side note, and I could be wrong, is it a more interesting episode if it was really just about learning a little bit of something about Matt, having this Mary girl live with him, and, you know, the sort of like, they're so different and they can't get along, but then he starts seeing something about her, and he breaks down some of his prejudices and sees the similarities in the aliens and the humans, and thus he's able to solve a case because he sees stuff in a different way. Like, it felt like there was a chance for something there, and maybe that's too like being done, but it just felt like her coming into the apartment, like the like opposite sort of thing. Like, the most they did was like, I don't know, she eats peanuts for breakfast. You're like, okay. Like, I just thought there was more to mine there than they did.
I didn't think that they like. I feel like the opposite. Learning about the aliens thing is that's reserved for Sykes and George. Like that's their relationship. But I did see like there was more potential for it's more of like the father, like the surrogate daughter thing that I was seeing in that relationship. It's like he is basically, presumably, mostly estranged from his own daughter because he never sees her and we never see her on the show. But he is kind of sad about that. He like recognizes that he's probably not a very good dad, but he still misses his daughter. And now he's got this chance to have this like surrogate daughter stay with him. And he's not very good at it. Like he doesn't really know how to deal with the teenager. And it was sort of, I think, that's where which I thought was kind of interesting. But I think to your point, Jordan, it could have been more of the focus of the episode because a bunch of stuff happened. There's a lot of stuff that happens in this episode. And by the end of the episode, we are intercutting quite a lot between a couple of different plot lines, like in a way that I thought was like too much. Like we're going back and forth too much. So I think they tried to like shoehorn a bunch of things into this episode. And as a consequence, they weren't able to really like, expand out on some of these more interesting ideas.
You didn't like the Sykes character development of him going to the dinner with with George's family and them having an open conversation about sex and prostitution with their 10-year-old that he was very uncomfortable with, and then at midway through the conversation they're like, "Hey Sykes, you've paid for sex. Why don't you tell us all about it?"
I love that. I thought that was great. This is one of the reasons I like this episode a lot more, is because I felt like it was just, they just kind of like went for it in a bunch of other ways. And in addition to the theme of this episode being about like sex and prostitution, like I thought there was a very strong theme of like role models going through this whole episode in terms of like Sykes like trying to kind of forge this bond with this young girl, and the young girl, like, yeah, she's there in the story. She's got like a quote unquote like a slave mindset and she can't think for herself. But really, actually, she doesn't have good role models. And what happens is she starts talking to, I think, Sykes or somebody about the movie, the Alien Heart movie, and Eleanor Roosevelt. And that suddenly becomes for her, like suddenly she has a vision of what her life can be or what she can be outside of just being a prostitute on the street with no parents and nowhere to go. She spent her whole life just like doing what other people are telling her to do instead of sort of looking to something outside of herself and setting her own goals and, having this role model. And so there's that theme around her. And then there's exactly the same theme happening with the son and Uncle Moodri. And I just thought it was kind of interesting, like the way they're playing around with like how young people relate to older people and what they need to, like what kind of relationships they have with older people, whether it's parents or whatever authority figures, and how they negotiate like themselves and their own opinions and their own direction in their lives vis-a-vis these other people.
Yeah, Mary Shelley definitely gets into that because she gets home. When Sykes gets home, he finds her waiting outside his door. Turns out she had no family to get on a bus to go see, so she just came back here. And she sort of explains sort of her background. That like she's been on the streets for a while. She recently got in trouble for robbing the John we saw at the start of the episode. And she did that because she had a boyfriend who told her to do it because they would take the money and start a new life. And of course, as soon as she handed the money over, the boyfriend disappeared. And now Sykes, which is so weird. He's a cop. I don't know why he's like this, but he's like, "You stole money? The law of the street says you have to pay." And I'm just like, "You're a cop, bro. Get it together."
We're missing one of the most important things of this episode, though. No one showed up to George's barbecue. Was everyone not heartbroken? No one showed up to poor George's barbecue, and he was so nervous about it. And the worst thing that could happen happened. No one showed up.
Yeah, I felt bad for him.
Luke didn't care. He's like, "Those burgers look terrible."
What are you gonna have Uncle Moodri talk to your coworkers? It's a bad idea.
And then they just all ate disgusting food, like disgusting food, which I guess is just going to be like a recurring theme. It's like, woohoo, aliens eat weird stuff. Ugh,
Yeah,
the sour
it's a
milk,
gag.
blah blah blah.
But while Sykes is with Mary Shelley, kind of having these conversations about her backstory and sort of her life and like where she's coming from, she happens to mention that like a friend of hers is in the Alien Heart movie. She actually has the same agent as her. So there, it's a clue that these girls are being run through an agency. And so, Sykes is like, "I'll go look into it. You stay here and watch the movie. I'll be back later tonight." Unfortunately for Mary Shelley, Sykes' neighbor Kathy we'll just let anybody into the building. If you walk up and just say, I'm an uncle of a girl upstairs. I'm just coming by to pick her up. No big deal. She lets you right in.
I like that later on she's like, it was my fault. I shouldn't have let him in. I was like, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it was your fault. Like, that was a major security lapse. You are not, you're not doing it right.
It was a huge red flag.
Yeah.
I will say I was surprised by this because I was like, oh, well, looks like they've kidnapped the main girl. Sykes comes home. She's dead on the floor.
Yeah,
I know. That was
I thought
surprising.
the same thing. I was shocked too. And again, this is, and even more so, like I mentioned it in the last episode, how like we sort of got to know this cop Henry, and then he dies. And this is even more so. Like we've spent more than half an episode, I think, with this girl thinking it's going to be a thing, and then bam, just dead on the floor, just lying there. I'm just like, okay, this is like some heavy stuff.
And my favorite part is he goes to the office. He's just like, Sykes is just like, George, we're taking the case. We need to solve her murder. And George is just like, I don't know. You're awfully close to it. And I was thinking something like, you could be the murderer. Like, you're a suspect, sir. You can't investigate.
Yeah, the murder site is your apartment. Like you.
The underage prostitute was found dead in your home.
I like the scene though where Matt comes home and he sees her dead body. And he's like, well, she doesn't need that gland now anymore, right? She doesn't need it.
He's addicted to glands now.
He looks really good.
At any rate, so they're on the case now. They're going to figure out what's going on with the casting of these movies and these young women put into prostitution. And they go to this scummy studio where Alien Heart was made, and they chase down a prostitute. They chase down a producer who runs away when he says they're from the LAPD. And when they catch him, he's just like, I don't want to pay my wife any more alimony. And I was like, is that when the police show up and chase you if you haven't paid your alimony? Maybe. I don't know.
No idea. It did seem like an overreaction.
Maybe it's a lot of money.
Well, he's living in his car,
Yeah.
so he says it's a lot. But he explains that they cast movies with an agency called the Charlotte Bronte Agency, and that's where you get all your newcomers from. They handle it. But in addition to actresses, they'll also provide escorts in addition to that sort of thing, if that's what you request. So the two go undercover as movie producers to meet with this agency, and they're there because they're making a film called Butterfly Road, which I believe they say is a sequel to Cocoon 3.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they're given basically a book full of girls, and they're like, hey, we like them. Can you send us this one over? And they point to Dallas Fort Worth, who is the friend of Mary Shelley, which, honestly, Dallas Fort Worth, great name for a girl. I recommend naming a daughter Dallas Fort Worth. I really like it.
I did like that her name was Dallas because it does have like original porn implications.
And Dallas shows up for the date, and she gets there. She's like, hi, my agency sent me over. George pours her a glass of milk, and she's like, well, let's discuss the fee. And they immediately charge her with prostitution and then blackmail her into wearing a wire to drop the charges. And I was just like, I don't know how ethical
This
any
is
of this
entrapment. George
Yeah.
solicited the prostitute. Like he is guilty of solicitation. And yeah, and now she's entrapped, and now she's like, they are doing the exact same thing to newcomers that all of the people that they are trying to fight against are doing, which is basically being like, oh, you have no recourse, you have no legal representation, you have no one to go to get you out of this like situation or to tell you what is legal or not legal. We're cops. We're just going to trap you into doing this thing.
Yeah, man. Hashtag just cop things.
At the very end of this, like this sting or whatever, when we're going to get there, when you see how traumatized she is in the scene in the back of the car, I was like, guys, I don't know if this was worth it.
Well, their plan is beyond insane. Essentially, they wire her up, and George calls the agency and strongly implies that Dallas is ripping off her basically pimps. And so when she comes in, they're like, we need you to take a ride in that limo with that pimp from earlier who killed that girl, Dorian Gray. And they get in this limo, and the plan is, once they've made it sound like she's stealing money, she'll get them to confess to the murder in the back of a limo while they're following the limo close enough to hear it on a wire. And they immediately lose the limo too. It was just like, the whole plan seemed like an excellent way to kill this woman.
Yeah, it was a terrible plan. They put her in grave danger. She has like zero training or any understanding. So she's just terrified the whole time. But because her entire life has just been doing what other people say, she just does what they tell her to do.
Yeah.
But they seem fine with it in this case because it's benefiting them. It just, the whole thing was just like really gross. But then there's a kind of a cool car chase. And So,
That's true. That's true.
honking and driving on the sidewalk. Which is kind of exciting.
We do get that. You're right. And, during the car chase, he confesses to the murderers and implicates the whole agency. So they manage to pull them over, save the girl just in time, and arrest the entire prostitution ring. And as they're doing the arrest of the main agent at the Bronte agency, Charlotte Bronte, the big reveal is she has a tattoo on her wrist, which means that she's actually one of the slave overseers from the ship, which up till now they've been teasing as being some sort of like something else, like not related to the newcomers necessarily. And this was the lamest reveal of who the overseers were. It's just like random newcomers with a tattoo.
Yeah, I thought the overseers were a different species until this moment.
I thought the exact same thing. And it's just like, I think you just assume. I thought, I'm like, it's going to be a thing where like end of season cliffhanger, we see these weird monster like aliens that have been running things, but it's like, oh yeah, they look exactly the same. They got tattoos. It's just like a society where some are in charge. You're like, oh, okay.
Well, I guess maybe that's the thing, is that they're society bred slaves. Does that make sense? So like they're one species, but
yeah,
and they are from a planet and that exist, but then they bred a bunch of slaves of their own species to do work for themselves. So it's
I suppose that's what's happened.
yeah.
I think there's still a chance that there's like a overseeing alien race, and these might just be middle managers who like betray their kind to like get slightly better privileges, because it doesn't really make sense, because they're apparently shipping them around the universe in these ships. So like a lot of it like doesn't add up. So I'm still holding out hope we're going to see a weird alien still. But that's the A plot. That's how the A plot wraps up, and we'll get into the B plot, which is a Buck Uncle Moodri special, and it's going to deal with the pilot where teenage Buck shot and killed a man. Well, he didn't kill him; he just shot a man.
Was it a cop that he shot?
No, it's like another hood, another like rough teen.
You can't tell. Everyone's age is impossible to tell.
I thought I was for sure that this was going to be something they were going to like slowly serialize through the season and kind of just like every couple episodes come back to, and sort of, because we sort of how they did in the last episode, they just hinted at it. Like there's one scene I think where he's like I'm not sleeping well, and then this one it's like it becomes the bigger thing, and they wrap it up real quick.
It's a retool for sure. I mean, even Uncle Moodri entering in like the first episode of the series, like after the TV movie and then the first episode, Uncle Moodri arrives. This next episode, they're like, we got to wrap up this shooting storyline. It was a mistake. We sort of talked about this in the pilot too, where it's just like, are they going to be able to stick the landing on this? And they clearly changed their mind. They're like, this was a mistake. This plot line.
Yeah. Essentially,
Moodri is just like hanging around, telling everyone about his beliefs in, let me see if I can pronounce this, pre-Selimism, which is a Tanctonese religion that's matriarchal, and like it's another religion. We know they have a bunch of them because we've seen them in other episodes, but it's another religion, and he's been telling Buck about it. He's been talking about their home planet, and this is really attractive to Buck because he doesn't like being on Earth. He doesn't like humans, so hearing about his people has really affected him. And, Buck's dealing with all his guilt over the shooting, and he like has a weird flashback where he like is a child who was traumatized on the ship by an overseer, which also seemed very dark. I was like, I don't know where this flashback's going. Seems awful.
Yeah, I thought this whole storyline was actually quite interesting. Like I was actually very interested in Buck's like trauma and how he's dealing with his trauma. And so as a consequence of the trauma of being enslaved as a child, then being forced to come to Earth and like having this altercation that I guess you guys saw in the pilot, he's also hanging out with like some rougher kids. Like he's rebelling and he's behaving strangely, and well, not strangely, but like he's behaving in like a very kind of rebellious, like angsty kind of teenage way, where you can feel like he's like headed down the wrong path. Like he's gonna go, he's gonna turn into like a bad seed kind of, juvenile delinquent kind of character. And the uncle kind of pulls him back from that through talking about spirituality and reconnecting him with his own roots, I guess.
I like that you said you were interested in the trauma that were happening to Buck, because my thought was, who wasn't interested in this plotline? The writers.
Yeah, I guess not. Because they just wrap it right up at the end of this episode, like in a very perfunctory way that I found very surprising. I thought that this was going to be the beginning of an ongoing, like a continuing plot line, but at the end of the episode, they just do a voiceover and wrap it up, which Luke can describe.
Well, yeah, Uncle Moodri takes Buck under his wing. Specifically, he's like, let's go down to the ocean. There's a place there that resembles our home planet, a holy site on our home planet, and we'll go down there and we'll experience it together. And while they're there, Uncle Moodri gives a speech about how we're all stardust and all planets are stardust, and you can belong anywhere. And he knows about the shooting. He's aware of this trauma, and he wants to show Buck that like you can live here, and I'll prove it. And he walks out into the ocean, is not burned by the salt water, which again only really works if you understood the implications of salt water. But Moodri, something he's done, something in his religious beliefs, something in how he lives, makes him immune to the salt water, and it sort of makes Buck realize there's hope. So he confesses to his murder, and he wants to heal. And because throughout the episode, Lieutenant Dobbs back at the police station has been working on the case of the shooting, he's taken one of Buck's friends in. Buck's friend has immediately ratted him out, took no time at all, and Lieutenant Dobbs, which I don't know, man. Again, I don't know about the police work at this force. He tells George, as soon as George walks in, he's like, hey, FYI, your son did that shooting, but I'm going to give you the chance to bring your own son in. I'm not going to do it for you.
Well, I'll say this. I was surprised to actually see that character because they established all these characters in the like TV movie, the pilot, and you've barely seen them at all. Like, especially... Like, I thought the police station was going to be more of a setting. Remember, there was that photographer who's in the opening credits. We haven't seen him since the pilot. Or, like, the little girl that's a friend with Jenny or whatever the little daughter's name is. She's in the opening credits. She hasn't been there either.
Yeah, the captain's not there. There's a lot of characters who they have not figured out what to do with.
Yeah, for a show that was originally supposed to be a kind of a police procedural, there's not a lot of police stuff. But can I just say as a side note, I don't think you guys will appreciate this, but some of our listeners might appreciate this. The exterior of the police headquarters is a very familiar building to me because it is the same exterior that they used on MathNet, which was like a police story. And did you guys ever watch Square One TV? Square One TV was a show on PBS. No, you don't know what I'm talking about. Some people will know. And if you know about this, please like comment on the Continuum Drag Instagram and be like, yes, I watched Square One TV. Square One TV was a show on PBS about math. It was like a half-hour show for kids. It had all of these little episodic things. It would be like songs and stuff, but it was all like based on cool, like it was kind of an MTV style show with different like little vignettes about math. They did like a parody of Casablanca and like made it about math. It was great. It was like one of the best shows on TV. And the last like 10 minutes of every episode was a serialized story with these two cops, and it was called MathNet. Like it was based on Dragnet, and there were these two mathematics cops, and they would solve mysteries. And so there would be like 10 minutes at the end of every episode, Monday through Friday, and on Friday they would solve the case. And there was like a voiceover. It was just like Dragnet. And then they had the exterior of the police building was the same building as they used in Alien Nation. So I just, for anyone who's interested and watched MathNet, that's a little Easter egg for you.
It's interesting to know that MathNet and Square, what was it called? Square what?
Square One TV.
Square One TV was cooler to you than Alien Nation.
Well, Square One is a little bit earlier. So that was like Square One was like an 80s, like a late 80s kind of thing. So I was like 6, 7, 8 years old watching Square One. So it was prior to Alien Nation.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll get back. We'll finish up this plot then. Buck has admitted to everything. His uncle's helping him. And George, of course, with Sykes, shows up at the beach. Someone's told them they're going to be there. And, you know, Buck confesses everything to his dad. It's a real heartfelt moment where his dad gives him a hug. And as they walk away, a voiceover comes on, presumably from the end of Buck's trial, in which he's given 3 years probation for the shooting and that we will no longer be discussing.
I like the thought that there was all these scenes with a judge filmed, like the other one where they couldn't get the warrant, and they've just cut it all out, and then the guy's watching the episode, he's like, come on, guys. I had a great scene there. I was the judge.
The judge. Yeah, the judge, recurring judge.
Yeah.
Maybe these episodes were written too long, and they were like, oh, it doesn't fit our time slot. We got to cut, and just like make it a voiceover. But I felt bad for this because so the kid agrees to turn himself in. They say in the voiceover that it was determined that he did it in self-defense, but yet somehow the judge still thinks that he needs probation. Like, if you killed someone in self-defense, aren't you off the hook? Like, why is the judge just like randomly deciding that, presumably because he's an alien, even though it was self-defense, he needs like to be taught a lesson and therefore be on probation for 3 years? It didn't make any
You
sense.
figured it out, Jane. It's because he's an alien.
It's because he was alien and discriminated against. That's
Yeah,
what
he's
I
an old
felt.
sponge head.
Someone also called them melon heads at one point earlier.
They have a lot of different names they use.
Yeah.
Well, that about wraps up the 2 episodes. I do have a couple, 3, I think, little notes I wanted to get to before we move on. Just stuff we didn't cover, like just little tidbits about these the newcomers. First of all, really enjoyed that they named the species Tanktonese. I was wondering why they didn't have a name in the pilot, and I'm like, oh, great. So they've just named them. So they're just called Tanktonese now, and they actually seem to have stopped calling them newcomers for the most part.
Right.
2, they reveal that a Tanktonese trait is, instead of getting a pain in your neck when you're stressed,
That's right.
your feet hurt.
Yeah.
And the third one is actually kind of a thing that I wonder if this is... Jordan, you'll probably disagree that it's an idea that the show is trying to get across. Jane, you might agree. We'll see what it is. There's a big stink over that dinner where George just talks about how humans and sex are messed up. Like newcomers, when they pick a partner, they're pretty monogamous. Sex is really about the relationship. It's not just like a physical act or desire they have to really get into, and that's a big difference between humans he sees and newcomers. This is a big speech he gives midway through the episode. I'm sure you remember. Except that midway through the episode, we see Buck with his ne'er-do-well friends, and his one friend is just catcalling every woman who walks by in a very like sexualized way. And I was just like, is the idea here that George is kind of like putting forward like, we're better than humans, we don't do this, when in reality it's just like they're more similar to us than George is letting on?
I just thought it was a very like kind of common statement about like how immigrant parents often feel, which is that you come to a new country, you see your kids or your family like being influenced by, you know, the morals or the lifestyle of the new country, and you say, oh, they're corrupting our culture. So like George has a very conservative, very specific idea of what his people are like and what his culture is, and he's going to constantly blame humans for corrupting the youth or getting people to do this, out, or the other thing. But actually it's a lot more nebulous than that, is that people will do what they will do and everyone has their own opinions. I mean, we already see like in both of the episodes, there are newcomers or Tanktonese who are in cahoots with the bad guys. Always. There's like in both cases, it's never been humans versus newcomers. There's always like a goon or somebody who's also a newcomer who's complicit in these things. So I think the point of the show is that it's actually trying to be kind of accurate and express kind of the complexity of, you know, a multiracial society, and a society where there's like integration and there's different levels of, you know, kind of perception from different people about what that integration means and how it works. And I think George is naive, like realistically, like he's a naive guy. And so his view is very simplistic, but it's just shown to he's being shown to be kind of wrong.
Okay, good. That's kind of what I had been thinking about it afterward too. So I'm glad we're on the same page.
Or it could just simply be that, and I actually agree with you as well, Jane, but I think that, you know, alternately, it could be that there are actual changes happening and it's happening faster than they have anticipated. And maybe that guy, that one kid who is like catcalling women as he walked by, maybe it is a mimic thing that he's seen. And that's like now something that is now the way he's going to act, because he's seen that gets a response when humans do it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's what
I
mean is that you are, as an immigrant, when you come to a place, especially young people, you are inevitably influenced by the dominant culture. And so you will enact that. Like, it's an inevitability that they're like, yes, maybe when they were on the ship and they just like slept in weird bunk beds and wore all the same clothes as we saw in the flashback, in Buck's flashback, they didn't do any of those things, but they were also in chains. And now they come to this world, and this is the doubt, like this is the give and take the downside of this is that, yes, they will be influenced by the culture, and some of them will be more influenced than others and will react to that influence in different ways. And so George, as a father, is put in this position where he does have to figure out like what to do about his son being pulled in this direction, right? And that's a very realistic, like, immigrant dad with, like, teenage first generation immigrant kids, like in first generation American kids or Canadian or whatever in any place. So I actually thought it was the seeds of like an interesting thing, and they didn't solve everything. I mean, they did wrap up Buck's story weirdly, but I don't think they solved all of it. I think that Buck's character as a troubled teen, I would hope that we would see more of that, even though the criminal case itself is like closed.
Oh, I'm sure there'll be a bunch of episodes about his probation.
Yeah, well, he's going to be stuck at home and his dad's like supervising him. So how much fun is that going to be for a teenager? He's probably going to do all sorts of things where he sneaks out and goes to sex parties,
Oh, no. Well, do you guys have any other last minute things you want to discuss before we get into ratings?
We mentioned that Matt wears a fedora in his casual dress, right?
Yeah. That was your number one takeaway.
Great. Just want to make sure that was that's mentioned.
All right. Well, let's look at the first episode, Fountain of Youth. You know how this works, Jane. Out of 10 possible stars, what do you want to give it?
I wanted to be generous because this was my first time watching the show, and I know that it's known to be very influential. I did not like this episode. I'm going to give it a 5. I thought it was like such a softball episode, and it mostly, I wrote that it was like a drama on the level of Seventh Heaven. Like, that was my note. I'm just like, this is such a tame, family oriented, like, also, as we discussed, like, everything that was happening was so obvious throughout the whole thing. I had very little interest in most of the characters and what was happening. So I'm going to give this a 5, which is a generous 5 in my view.
Jordan?
Also giving a generous 5. I pretty much feel exactly the same way. It just felt like everything was so telegraphed from the beginning that it felt like, why are we even spending the time getting here? You could just be like, hey, I'm an evil doctor, take me away. And I was just like, okay. So I just thought, 5 out of 10. I'll be friendly to the show because it's technically their first episode.
I'm going to go with a 6. I thought it was easy watching, went down smooth. All right, Jane, what about Lost Little Lamb?
So I thought this one was a lot better, this episode, we've pointed out a lot of the problems and the bumpiness around it, but actually overall, like, when thinking about like the themes of the show, and I thought like the relationships in this episode were more complex, and I didn't feel like they wrapped up the Buck thing with the voiceover, but a lot of the themes of this episode of like what we were talking about earlier with like role models and stuff. Like, I just thought there was a lot of interesting stuff. They were laying the groundwork for a lot of interesting stuff. And so I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10.
Big upward movement there. Jordan?
I thought it was marginally better. It was okay. I just think it's like, there's parts that are interesting, and I think if you think about it, discussion about this sort of, like Jane was mentioning before, the implications of integrating to a society and those complications. I think those are all interesting concepts. I think we're maybe being generous because the show hints at that stuff. Like, you can have the conversation around it, but it's not like they really show it that well. And I think it's okay. I don't know how deft their hand is with a lot of this stuff. I just think it's okay. I think if they do everything okay, so 6 out of 10.
6 out of 10. Well, you know what I thought? Went down easy, real smooth. I'm going to give it a 6. That wraps it up. So, Jane, thank you so much for coming back. It's always a pleasure to have you. Some very good insights on this show from you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed being on, and I was happy that somebody finally forced me to watch Alien Nation, because it had been on my radar since I was a teenager, and I had never really taken the leap. So this was great.
Your first and probably last taste of Alien Nation.
Yeah.
You're too busy watching, what was it called? Math Time 6000? What was that show?
MathNet, guys.
MathNet.
No, honestly, you guys need to look up some episodes of Square One TV. I think they're probably on YouTube. You can find them. You would really like them. Like, they are legit, Like, really interesting, really fun parodies. There's a whole bunch of actors in them, like who were on the show that end up in all sorts of television, like a bunch of, you'd recognize a ton of the character actors that are in it, in all of these little skits and stuff. No, it was a great show. And anyone who know, if you know, you know, it was one of the best shows on television in the 80s. So yeah.
If you know, you know. There's no better way of phrasing it. Listener, if you know our email address. It's continuumdrag@gmail.com. And of course, on social media, we're gonna have some clips from these episodes of Alien Nation. There's that alien's blood, that alien's pink blood.
It should all just be clips of them saying stuff that the judge told them.
Off-camera clips.
Yeah.
You guys have to put up the clip of the roofie section, because that's freaking hilarious.
I'll dig it out. You can find those at Continuum Drag, is where you get it on, where do we have it? Instagram, X, Facebook, all the places. But that wraps it up. So listeners, thank you for joining us. And Jordan, I'll see you in the next one.
See you then.
Can't get enough Continuum Drag? Commission a bonus episode for charity.
Want us to watch an episode we missed after using the escape pod or during a best of run? No problem.
Is there an episode of a series we've never watched or a TV movie you want us to cover? You got it.
Wish we'd comment on your favorite movie, content, or other weird media? Sure, why not?
All you have to do is make a donation to one of the charities selected by past guests on our website.
We suggest a donation of $50 per television hour of content we're watching, but everyone's means are different, so give what you can.
Get all the details about bonus episodes for charity on our website, continuumdrag.podbean.com, or follow the links in our social media profiles.
Continuum Drag is recorded in Ontario, Canada, and Seoul, South Korea. Theme music by James Rick Seidler. Produced by Jordan Dullick and Luke Black. Special thanks to Aaron Hughes.